Greetings and salutations, fellow book readers. This is Mark, and the book I will review today is Kokoro. Before we continue, this is personalized limited edition of Kokoro with leather cover designed and made by me. At the end of the video, I will tell you a couple of ways of how you can get one for yourself if you are interested. Now let's get back to the review. Kokoro is a 1914 novel by Natsume Soseki, who probably was Japan's first modern writer. He lived most of his life during the Meiji era, which was the beginning of the modernization of Japan and was marked by the struggles between the traditionalists and the modernists, and it is reflected in Soseki's writings. This time period was also the initial stages of formation of the Empire of Japan, with the growing nationalism and xenophobia. Well, xenophobia seems was always present in the Japanese society. It might have something to do with living isolated on an island, and it probably affected Soseki personally, since he was a great admirer of Chinese literature. Soseki had a rather dark outlook on life, but which Japanese writer doesn't? The somber mood was probably caused by his childhood traumas when, as an infant, he was somewhat abandoned by his biological parents, and this fear of loneliness is pretty present in Kokoro. "I am a lonely man," he said again that evening. "And is it not possible that you are also a lonely person? But I am an older man, and I can live with my loneliness quietly. You are young, and it must be difficult to accept your loneliness. You must sometimes want to fight it." Kokoro is usually translated as heart or feeling, but I myself like nostalgia, which according to Dan Draper from Mad Men literally translates from the Greek as the pain from an old wound, and I think it defines the book so well. I know in Greek nostalgia actually means pain of homecoming, but in this specific situation I prefer the Hollywood translation. Kokoro is considered by many the best Japanese novel. I don't know if I agree, because there are so many great ones and it is difficult to pick one. But it is up there with No Longer Human by Osamu Dazai and Snow Country by Yasunari Kawabata. And there are some great historical novels such as Silence, which was made into a movie a few years back by Martin Scorsese. Also Tale of Genji and Musashi. So Kokoro is between the best modern Japanese novels, but more important, it had great influence on the development of modern Japanese literature and many Japanese writers. What is Kokoro about? Well, as I mentioned before, it is about suffering from the pain from an old, unhealed wound, a mix of guilt and regret, and the destructive power the past can hold over us if we are unable to let it go. I am an inconsistent creature. Perhaps it is the pressure of my past, and not my own perverse mind, that has made me into this contradictory being. I am all too well aware of this fault in myself. You must forgive me. The book also talks about maturing and entering the adulthood as an individual. It seems to mirror Japan of that time, with its shift from closed traditional society to modern Western-influenced country. Now, a brief run of the plot. The base of the story is the relationship between the narrator, who is a young individual beginning adult life, and Sensei, who is a middle-aged, somewhat of a hermit, unhappy man living with his wife. The book is divided into three parts. The first two parts are narrated by the narrator, and the third part is a letter written by Sensei and read by the narrator. In part one, Sensei and I, the narrator, meets Sensei in a beach resort and later visits him in Tokyo, where he meets his wife. On one of the visits, he follows Sensei to the cemetery, where they visit a mysterious grave. And later he discovers through Sensei's wife that it is the grave of Sensei's friend. Sensei, when confronted, promises to eventually tell him the story of his past. Over the next few years, he becomes a frequent visitor to Sensei's home, and he learns some things from and about Sensei. In part 2, My Parents and I, the narrator, after graduating, returns to his parents' home in the country. His father is sick and progressively getting worse, and hopes the son will carry on the family's responsibilities. But he is surprised and disappointed at the narrator's relaxed attitude and lack of ambition, which the latter credits to his friendship with Sensei. Eventually, a thick letter arrives from Sensei with the previously promised history of his life. In part 3, Sensei's Testament, the narrator gets on the train back to Tokyo, where he reads the whole letter. And that's the basic plot. What are my thoughts about Kokoro? The book explores human feelings in a profound manner, and it is written in this delicate and feminine style so common to the Japanese literature with a deeply melancholic tone. The base is an interaction, a friendship between an older and a younger man, and how it impacts their lives. They are in a student-master relationship, and that's why the narrator always refers to his older friend as sensei, which in Japanese means teacher. So the main theme of the book is human relationships, how they impact our lives and whom they transform us into, and also the need to disconnect from the past. The memory of having sat at someone's feet will later make you want to trample him underfoot. And all of this can be summed up by the word change, which carries in itself the feelings of loneliness and regrets. The narrator is changing from child into adult, and Japan is changing from a backward feudal state into a modern nation. Kokoro symbolizes the dying of the Meiji era, which many Japanese equated to the end of long and glorious history with its deep traditions. The death is represented psychologically and physically. Sensei is dying psychologically, while the narrator's father is dying physically. And the culmination is the actual death of the Emperor Meiji, where some individuals, not being able to deal with the change, follow him, such as General Nogi, who commits suicide. It reminded me a scene from the film Woman in Berlin, when the death of Hitler and surrender to the Soviets is announced. Some German officers right away commit suicide, but others, more hopeful, accept it and stay. Usually the younger generation, such as the narrator in the book, and continue into the new era. I will not hesitate to cast upon you the shadow thrown by the darkness of human life. But do not be afraid. Gaze steadfastly into the darkness and find there the things that will be of use to you. The importance of Meiji era cannot be understated as the underlying theme of Kokoro. The two singular events that define that time period are the fall of Edo Castle, which allowed for the change of the capital from Kyoto to Edo and renaming it Tokyo. And this event can be considered the beginning of Meiji restoration and unification of Japan. The other was the Russo-Japanese War of 1905, which established Japan as a mother nation state able to compete with other modern states. The Meiji era lasted almost half a century, and it was probably the time of the most profound and fastest changes in Japan's history. Similar to the Stalin era in the Soviet Union, perhaps a bit less bloody, it has been said that Stalin came to power in Russia where the main source of power was the horse, and left it with nuclear weapons and a thriving space program. And something similar happened in Japan. Before Meiji, the country was a divided feudal state run by local shoguns. With the arrival of the Emperor Meiji, the period called Meiji Restoration began, which consolidated power in the hands of the emperor, who started the process of rapid industrialization and adaptation of Western values. This transition resulted in deep political and, more importantly, social changes, and as with any change, there was great resistance and sadness for the passing of the good old days. Many people in Japan were not happy about this transformation, and I think this feeling is so well expressed by Sensei in this deeply melancholic sentence. You see, loneliness is the price we have to pay for being born in this modern age, so full of freedom, independence, and our own egoistical selves. Sensei sees change as something negative, something that usually is a disappointment. His dislike for the change stems from his youth, when he was cheated by the people he trusted and who were supposed to protect him. But he doesn't blame the individuals, since he doesn't see them as inherently good or bad, but rather fluid and adapting, victims of changing circumstances and exterior influences, especially money. On the whole, all people are good, or at least they are normal. The frightening thing is that they can suddenly turn bad when it comes to the crunch. So Sensei became traumatized by change, its possible consequences, and this somewhat suspends him in time. In his personal life, he locked himself into a routine of inaction and allows as little deviation from it as possible. He seems resistant to and even traumatized by action. He lives a kind of useless existence, doesn't read nor study, and doesn't seem to care or think any kind of improvement of his life is possible. Basically, he accepted and became resigned to his situation. To tell you the truth, I used to consider it a disgrace to be found ignorant by other people, but now I find that I am not ashamed of knowing less than others, and I am less inclined to force myself to read books. In short, I have grown old and decrepit. Sensei's resistance to change is connected to regrets he has about his past, something we have to deal with ourselves, and this leads to the feelings of loneliness, since no one really understands what one feels inside. The inner loneliness that isolates us from the others makes us feel as nobody cares, because nobody can understand the inner struggle of the other, the inability to feel the pain of other. But once I could look back on it in a calmer frame of mind, it struck me that his motive was surely not so simple and straightforward. Had it resulted from a fatal collision between reality and ideals? Perhaps, but this was still not quite it. Eventually, I began to wonder whether it was not the same unbearable loneliness that I now felt that had brought Kay to his decision. There is also a curse of silence and pain of things not said, which lead to deep feelings of guilt, self-inflicted guilt, used as an excuse for not wanting to change. Sensei feels he betrayed his friend, just like he was betrayed by his relatives, and the guilt of it torments his life. He feels he hasn't paid for his act, and this seems to maintain him in a kind of psychological hell. And he believes there is no redemption, only one way to end his emotional torture, and its time had arrived. Now I myself am about to cut open my heart and drench your face with my blood, and I shall be satisfied if, when my heart stops beating, a new life lodges itself in your breast. It might seem as the friend was responsible for Sensei's lifelong suffering, but it was a self-inflicted punishment caused by the Sensei's interpretation of the events and inability to let the past go. The sentence written by Sensei's friend, "Why did I waited so long to die?" could have been Sensei's own, and the answer is that he needed time to suffer and accumulate pain to the point of being too much to deal with. Too much for the Japanese, which seems to be a lot less than we in the West are willing to tolerate. Japanese seems to have this casual relationship with death and use it quite freely. It appears to be very well integrated into their lives, and that's why they appear not to fear it as much. It is different from us since we see death as separate from life, the last option to consider, the end. The narrator is a young man, never named. The plot is basically his story, even though it is focused on the sensei. It is his introduction to the adult world, and he learns from the experience of others, older individuals. When the student is ready, the master will appear, and so he meets sensei. The idea is for the narrator to learn and draw conclusions how to live his own life, the seemingly small things he should try to avoid so he doesn't head in a wrong direction and ends in a metaphorical dead-end street. The sensei's story is a warning about possible consequences, but it is he who must decide what to make out of it. There is also Sensei's wife, a lesser character, not very well explored. She is nothing more than a victim of the decisions made by him, probably to reinforce the idea that we all can be bad unintentionally and even to the people we care for. She also reflects the general victims of the decisions and mistakes made by the few, which in the past largely applied to women. Perhaps not so much now. And what keeps the victims going is the pleasure they get from the sacrifices they make. Sensei would be far more unhappy without me. Why? He might not even want to go on living without me. It may seem very conceited of me, but I do really believe that I am able to make him as happy as is humanly possible. I believe that no one else would be able to make him as happy as I can. Without this belief, I would not be as contented as I am. To sum it up, Kokoro is a beautifully written novel about the complexities of human relationships and how they reflect and are being influenced by the general behavior of the society. It portrays the personal struggle at trying to cut ourselves from the destructive influences of the past and society shifts and attempts to adapt to the new reality. The mood of the story is reflected by words such as tragedy, sadness, futility, melancholy, tragedy, and death. Kokoro is also the Oriental version of the power of sin, and for us in the West, a window into the sentimental, usually well hidden side of the mysterious East. There is a 1955 Japanese adaptation of Kokoro, which I enjoyed and found it to be a decent visual addition to the book. Japanese usually do a pretty good job adapting their literary works into cinema. The other adaptation I saw is a 1973 film, also Japanese, where the director takes a lot of creative liberty with Kokoro's plot. It is an interesting modern twist on a classic. I preferred the older version because it was more true to the novel, and also being in black and white, I think it transmitted the mood of the story more deeply. Okay, let's talk about the physical book. The book I am holding is a paperback which I transformed into hardcover leather-bound edition. To make the cover, I use grade A, naturally tan hide I buy from a tanner in North Spain. It is the same leather Louis Vuitton uses to make his bags, so it is top quality. I do all the processing of the leather myself, First, I designed the cover, and what I did here, I used this 19th century Japanese woodblock print by the famous artist Utagawa Hiroshige. It is a depiction of Naruto rapids on the island of Shikoku. I thought the violent flow of water kind of reflected the brutal, emotionally unstable, and dangerous periods of individual lives, and the high possibility of not being able to come out of it. I thought the image can be seen as an abstract reflection of the Kokoro's theme. This is the back with the blurb, and inside front cover I printed a quote from the book. If you want to see a more detailed video where I explain how I transform paperback into leather-bound hardcover, click on the link in the description. I will make a maximum of 100 editions of each title. Each one will be numbered and initialed, and the numbers will go in chronological order from 2 up, since number 1 stays with me. The price will be around $100, so if you would like me to make one for you, you can click below on my email and send me a message. I do not guarantee I will do it, since it will depend on the time I have available, access to leather, and if I can get my hands on the copy of the book. Now, if you're not willing to spend the $100, but you still want the book, what you can do is click below on the PayPal link and donate $3 or more to my channel. And for every 100 donations, I will make a lottery and draw one name, and the winner will receive the book. So, if you are cheap but feel lucky, this might be the way to do it. Also, your donations give me the extra motivation to make the book reviews, and I appreciate them very much, so thank you in advance. One more thing, when you make your donation, remember to include the title of the book you would like to win. The book itself is beautiful. Visually, it has a very nice texture, it smells great, and the more you handle it, the more beautiful it will become. And it makes a great gift for yourself or somebody who appreciates books. So if you want one, don't snooze or you might lose. Well, that's it, so let's end it here, and until next time, keep your ear close to the ground and read a book. Adios.